YouTube. It's still going live.
Hi.
Hello, Instagram.
Hello.
Welcome to the recording of the Sherwin Brothers Show, episode 5. And we're doing a little
Cool.
sound check on YouTube. Hope it
Sounds
sounds
good.
good
Sounds
over
good.
there on Instagram. Feel free to chime in during the episode. Tyler will be monitoring your comments and we'll bring in your guys' opinions and feedback as we record this. So, and YouTube, this is the first time that we've done this on YouTube. So feel free to chime in as well to today's episode, and we'll try and bring in as many comments as we can. All right, here we go. Hitting record on the
Are you doing?
podcast.
Are you doing the intro?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure. Welcome to the Sherwin Brothers Show. My name is Austin Sherwin, here with my brother.
Tyler Sherwin.
And today is episode 5. 5 whole
Wow.
episodes.
Can't
So
believe we made it.
exciting. We made it. And we've done some equipment upgrades. We got some mics. We got a mixer.
Wow.
It's a big day.
Next, we'll get a soundboard so we can make all the MLG, all the horn
Yeah,
sounds.
air horns and stuff.
That'd be great.
So today's episode is on Dungeons and Dragons.
Finally.
The nerds come out. All right. So to preface this, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons for the first time earlier this year. One of my friends has played a lot, and he is a dungeon master, and he got me into it. And at the same time, my wife's cousin and her husband wanted to play a game. So I started 2 campaigns pretty much simultaneously, and I was a total noob, and I still am. So I've played maybe a total of like 4 or 5 sessions.
Hmm.
Tyler, tell them your history with Dungeons and Dragons.
I've played more than Austin, but not more than most people who get into it. I played with some friends. Um, I had a friend who, or a couple friends, I guess. We've been friends for years from junior high, and we've always been like video game friends, but we've never, I think, and my friend Davey, he's played a decent amount of Dungeons and Dragons, and he just uh, was like, "Hey, I got this campaign. I'm setting up this story. You guys want to start playing?" And so him, my friend Cameron, and then we got some of Davey's friends and other people. Yeah, we all started a group. So that was last year, and then we haven't been playing this semester and last semester just because time and
Life.
everything. Yeah, it stopped working as the group as a whole. Like we're still friends and hang out, but we played for, I don't remember exactly. We played for months, several months of meeting and playing every other week. Pretty much it ended up being,
Mhm.
and
Nice.
yeah, it was a good time.
So you're pretty experienced.
Fairly, not compared with
What's
the
your highest level
other guys.
character?
We didn't actually. The levels were kind of interesting. We made it. I think we in the end we were 7.
Okay.
So I think I don't know because I haven't played with other dungeon masters really, so I'm not sure like how fast other people level up and everything.
Hmm.
But um, yeah, we played a decent amount, and but we didn't level up every time we played for sure.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so
I feel like the higher you get, the more sessions it takes to move
yeah,
up levels, right?
yeah,
It's kind of like on an exponential curve.
yeah. Like, we moved pretty fast in the first little bit because
Right.
and it was fun because Cameron and I had never played before this, and everyone else had played a lot, and so Cameron and I were just like, was figure this out. I don't know what to do. I don't know what we can do, what we can't do, all that stuff. Um, so we kind of just went along and like tried to learn as we go and do more and get more at like involved as we went.
Hmm.
And they were all with the leveling. They were all like, oh yeah, if you the first couple levels are kind of boring, so we're just gonna
Right.
do that quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. So I feel like you're way more experienced than me. But I just wanted to start. So I had like heard of Dungeons and Dragons growing up a lot.
Of course.
One of our uncles actually played back in the day when it was considered like a demonic cult thing in the 80s.
Witchcraft.
I think that's the first time I heard about it. But this year was the first time playing it, and it's a lot more fun than I thought it would be. Actually,
Yeah.
I mostly pictured a bunch of like smelly nerds, like the kind that used to be at the game stores we used to frequent to play Magic the Gathering a lot. just sitting around and essentially LARPing in their seats, which in some ways it is. But it's actually a lot of fun. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the game, the way it works is you're in an open world and you all have fantasy characters of different races and classes. You have different powers. And then you get to basically choose. There's usually a quest that you're kind of trying to fulfill. Your character has attributes, you have alignments. So just like in real life, you might, actually be kind of an evil person or a good person,
Yeah.
or you know there's political things you can be wanting to support a certain group or class of characters, or you can be um, just an anarchist as a character.
Mhm.
But then you have all these powers and you go on quests, but it's fun because you have complete control over the choices you make. So you're generally put with a group, like the story kind of puts you together in some scenario so that you
Mhm.
start off.
You meet at an inn or
Yeah.
something.
But then from there you could be like, I want to go pilfer the barrel of the next door neighbor, or I want to like kill the bartender. Or you can be like, hey, you and me, let's go into the woods and find out what's out there.
Mhm.
It's completely open. And
Mhm.
then one person plays the dungeon master, who is, I guess, kind of like a god of fate in a way with the world. He kind of he or she determines, okay, how plausible is it that you can do that, and you have to roll some dice to do certain actions.
Mhm.
And so there is, some level of chance and reality to it, but it's
Just like real
it's
life.
kind of fun because you can. It's a completely open world. You get to choose
Mhm.
whatever you do, so it's
Mhm.
interesting in that way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and it's kind of daunting at first when I started. For I feel like Cameron and I had very similar experience where we started, and it's cool because you're like I can do anything, but then also we're like, so what does that mean? you know, it takes a minute before to start realizing kind of how the game works, but also just like, oh, okay, so like can just kind of do anything. It's like, what do I do? you know?
Right. And for every action, there's ramifications. That's
Right.
kind of where the dungeon master comes in too. So you
Hmm.
can choose to run into the woods, but by yourself, but you might run
Yeah.
into like a giant group of people that just kill you, right?
Hmm.
And since you're in a group, you have group dynamics and you get to choose your opinions and your actions, but the group then has their character's agency to be like, well, I don't like that. I'm just going to kill you. Or we're not going to treat you fairly when we like divide up treasure from killing a monster or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, so a lot of it, I've, the first thing I noticed, I think, when I started playing was that your experience playing is going to vary on all depending on your group.
Right.
So, and a lot depends on your dungeon master too, because the way that things happen or the way the story plays out, a lot of it depends on him or her. No matter what, uh, like the storyline you're following, you can be following a specific storyline. Like in my case, where my friend had a world, he had a big map drawn out, and he had a story that he had in mind. He had a thing that he had in. He had something that he intended for us to accomplish. I guess
Hmm.
he didn't just tell us outright. He was like, he told us kind of like we had heard some rumors about some treasure in this location, and blah, blah, and I think at the very beginning, it's been a while, but I think at the very beginning we had a tip also of oh no, the first day we found somebody who gave us a tip of this magical dwarf that we could go find, and he knew more about what we were looking for.
Uh,
And
sorry, drink break, everybody. We'll edit this out of
the
the
same time,
podcast, but you people live, you get to watch us drink. So,
all the drinks. But I forgot what I was gonna say.
me too. So,
Oh, but yeah, it totally depends on your group, and it's back to that like of how because like you said, you can go off into the woods, you can try to chew the leg off of your companion, you can do anything you want, but it depends on your group because they're gonna react differently. And going in, we realized pretty quickly that one of the guys um, that came to the group I didn't know beforehand, he was fairly serious about it,
hmm,
and he not that he didn't want to have a good time, but he came in, I think, expecting like, okay, we're coming in as a group. We have a quest,
Yeah.
like he was like, we're gonna come, like, I want to see where the story goes. Like, we're gonna progress. How do we do this? How do we work together as a team?
Yeah.
And so he came into it expecting a lot more of that, of like serious, like not staying more in character of
Mhm.
your character,
Yeah.
and more of the role playing and the like.
This is serious business. Like
Yeah,
it's not just we're no longer just a group of friends getting together to have fun. Like
yeah.
we're here for the game.
We're playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
This is what we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, it's fun too to see. So like in the group that we play with my wife and her cousins, they invited another couple. So her cousin's husband is the dungeon master, and then there's five of us: me, Miranda, her cousin Colleen, couple. And it's so interesting because we've never met this couple before. They're like friends of her cousins.
Mm.
And the last time we were playing with them, we were driving up, and kind of hit us. We were like, we don't know these people at all. Like we are more familiar with these people's Dungeons and Dragons characters, and they're more familiar with ours than we are in real life. But it's kind of fun that way. And so, like, when we arrived there, we were like, "What do you guys do for work? Like, what? Who are you?" You know. But it's fun that you can connect that way, and it also is fun because at least in the two groups that I play in, it's a good mix of you're in character and you're having fun, but then at the same time, there's like a lot of sarcasm and laughter, and generally the dungeon master kind of tells the story. So it's like you shoot an arrow, oh, he rolls a dice, and it's like, you missed, and has the liberty to be like, oh, and it flies past the goblin's ear, and you barely miss, but half the time we all like make up our own reasons why we missed, and it's fun that way because you can be silly and stuff. But yeah, I'm sure if you have a really serious group, it's a pretty different dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this, or one of the things that sparked the interest in this doing this episode, one is because it's a fun topic, and I think it's definitely resurging in popularity ever since Stranger Things. There's
Yeah.
actually I've heard that from like the owners of Dungeons and Dragons. They're like, oh yeah, like book sales and dice sales and everything has increased significantly
Mm-hmm.
recently. And I think the stigma of the like demons and witches and
Yeah.
dark stuff has kind of gone away.
Yeah.
But my wife is a communications disorders major, and so they talk about different things that people are using to treat and help people who have communication problems, especially kids with autism. And one of her professors talked about how Dungeons and Dragons is one of the best things you can do, not only for kids with autism, but just for kids in general. So I did some research on it, and this is a burgeoning thing. It's popping up more and more. There's in Nova Scotia, there's a center where like they basically set up Dungeons and Dragons groups for kids with autism. And then I listened to a podcast interview on I think it's called Dragon Talk, which is like the main Dungeons and Dragons podcast done by Wizards of the Coast.
Mm.
And in
Which
20
is that's the company that owns
yeah,
Dungeons and Dragons now.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they had a doctor of psychology on who played Dungeons and Dragons as a teenager. And he's doing the same thing in Seattle. He is creating these groups where kids with autism get together, and he's the dungeon master, and they play Dungeons and Dragons. And so, and he talks about how it helps these kids who regularly struggle with social interaction and emotional connection. It helps these kids develop those skills. And it's really interesting to listen to because he said that, for example, like there was one kid in his group who like never made eye contact with anybody, but because of the role playing nature of it, they they give them a character and they say, here's what your character likes and dislikes. Here's your character's goals and motives and what you're good at, what you're not good at. And he says they have like a reward system. So like the more that the kids role play and get into character, the more they're rewarded. And they also get punished for like interrupting another player's turn
Mm.
or train of thought or something, and they get punished for delaying the game. Like if it's your turn and you should be going, you get like a negative mark if you're, just like being a nuisance or something,
Mhm.
which I think should be applied in all
And all
all
groups.
groups. Because
I would have had a lot of negative marks.
yeah, before we were doing the side note, but before we were doing this episode, we did a poll on Instagram, and one person responded that they're not interested in Dungeons and Dragons because it sounds like it takes forever, and they'd probably only do it if they had Adderall. He's like, and even then, that's a big maybe. But that's a side note. But anyway, so yeah, he talks about how this kid who didn't make eye contact with anybody in real life became like a full blown charismatic diplomat in the game. They were
Hmm.
like, he was like a smooth talking schmoozer that like connected with people and was like really good at like negotiating
Hmm.
and convincing people, and he all of a sudden started like connecting with people.
Hmm.
And they said at first it didn't translate very much into like real life scenarios, but over time it did start to more and more, where they
Hmm.
started to um, apply the things that their character they had learned through their character
Hmm.
into real life.
So I
Pretty
wonder
cool.
then how much like the character, because you said they gave them a character, and that's obviously just that specific case. But I wonder then if it depends on how much, like which character they give the kids, or I don't know how old they are, the people.
Yeah,
Um,
I think they're generally teenagers between the age of like 14 and 18.
okay, that makes sense. But I wonder, if they give them a specific character with specific traits, like you said, that guy's character was probably a diplomat, or they told him, all right, your guy is very outgoing, he's charismatic, he loves to, debate, whatever. He talks his way into everything, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if you gave them, I don't know, if you gave him a different character, would they start developing more of the traits just of that character? You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah.
if they gave him one, which I'm sure they wouldn't, but like something like your character is very chaotic.
Yeah.
They don't know what they want most of the time. They just kind of, whenever they feel like doing something, they just go for it. And they,
Right.
and then if they'd start becoming more like that,
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
know.
he said, yeah, it's interesting because there hasn't been a lot of actual studies done on it.
Mm.
So he said most of the stuff we do, and this was in 2016, so I'm sure there's more now because he said
Mhm.
there was kind of a growing interest in these types of things. And he said, role playing has been used in psychological treatment for
Mm.
decades. It's nothing
Yeah.
new, and even in like business training
Right.
or any, it's like you become a lifeguard, you role play.
Yeah.
What if somebody drowns, right?
Yeah.
So it's nothing new, and it's been used in psychological treatment for a long time.
Mm.
Um, but he did say that they pick specific character
Right.
types, right? So nobody's alignment is evil.
Yeah.
They give them
Yeah.
all a good alignment. Part of that is because they have to explain to the parents half the time what Dungeons and Dragons is and
Mhm.
why this is being done.
Right.
He said most of the stuff, the evidence is anecdotal, but generally the skills that they acquire and the thinking process is kind of what translates into real life, as long as they
Mhm.
understand.
Yeah.
This is.
Which,
He
yeah,
said,
which makes sense because they have to focus on how do I be charismatic,
yeah,
you know? Like,
right. And he said some of the reasons it works is because it's still the same social interactions. Like, so it's group storytelling, right? Like you
mm,
have these people and everybody kind of in their mind's eye. Sometimes you have like the little city and map and stuff, and
yeah.
sometimes it's just like, make it up in your mind, imagine you're in an
Mhm.
inn. So he said part of it is it's real enough that they do have to respond and interact with each other,
Mhm.
but it's also safe.
Mm.
Like it's a safe place because you are your character, but your character can fail, your character can get hurt, it can
Mhm.
die, it can have bad social interactions,
Mhm.
and you can learn from them
Right.
how that works. And then he said also, it's the same interactions, but it's on such what's the word, like an elongated time scale. Like
Mm.
it's a dilated time scale
Right. They
because
can
everybody
stop.
gets a turn. So it's like
Mhm.
I say this to this person, and then you get to say, okay, if he says that, I'm gonna say this. Instead of an actual
Hmm.
conversation where you're expected to like respond and interact
Right.
immediately, you have time to like think about your choices, see how they play out, and then it's turn based, and so it just kind of goes
Hmm.
around like that.
Yeah, and which totally makes sense because the first, well, also, Jess Burdett says that's amazing on Instagram. Thanks, Jess, for watching. But that was the first thing that I thought of when you were telling me about doing this, or your idea about doing this for an episode. That was the first thing. At first, I was like, "Oh, that's interesting," and then I thought, "Oh, well, that kind of makes sense because it's a controlled, safe space
Hmm.
where, especially if I'm assuming they have like one of the psychologist is the DM, the dungeon master,
Right.
and so they're controlling how the story goes, how what happens and reactions, in in response to things. And also, yeah, like I think one of the well-known signs or symptoms, I don't know, of autism is uh, sensory sensitivity, right?
Hmm.
That's just that what a lot of it manifests in a lot of kids that have autism.
Yeah.
So it totally makes sense where in a normal social situation, it's often a group of people, it's often several people talking at once. And so if you're trying to help these kids learn to interact socially and learn to, you know, like in that guy's case of be more maybe, I don't know, they're probably not trying to just make him charismatic.
Right.
That's maybe not the right word, but
More
more,
social.
yeah, more able to maybe like talk about what he wants or ask for what he wants. And I don't know. Um, it totally makes sense to do it in this space where you don't have to worry about competing with other people for the attention or for your turn to talk and
Mhm.
all these other people talking and not and which person do you focus on,
Yeah.
which can be overwhelming for all of us.
Right. Yeah, and you said that's part of the reason it works so well too, is because it's a defined framework. And
Mm,
so, these kids already love like video games where they can understand the rules and the parameters and stuff. But he said, like when you're in a role playing situation like that, it's not nearly as ambiguous as real life, which
mhm.
is
Yeah.
really interesting because
Yeah.
it's not. And we interact with people day in and day out, but it is a pretty ambiguous thing. And
Yeah.
it also adds another level of thinking and processing where, we kind of don't have that time to think about, like, at least not all the time, the consequences of our actions, or we're a
Mm,
lot less worried about them in Dungeons and Dragons
right.
versus real life where you're like, okay, people are going to think this about me, like whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But being able to detach yourself from you and just be your character really changes things. And
Mm-hmm.
that was another thing he talked about, was how he really rewards role playing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so, they give these kids, this is your character, and this is sometimes even like, the way he would talk or the things that he would love or do, and the guy rewards heavily when they get into character. And he said it's so fun to see some of these kids with autism who, you know, yeah, in real life they don't really portray their personality a lot in their speech to begin with. And then when you give them a character, they like come to life and they are, a
Mm-hmm.
pirate captain or like a nobleman. And he said, the more they do that, like it helps them open up and form friendships and bonds, especially with the other
Mm-hmm.
kids in their groups.
Mm-hmm.
He said they have some that go on to play with each other for like years because they form this friend group, which
Yeah.
normally they struggle to do to begin with.
Hmm. Yeah, well, that totally makes sense. And that whole thing about your point about it's less ambiguous, because yeah, like pretty much every normal social situation is fairly ambiguous, or there's some ambiguity. But even yeah, like in defining yourself, it's like it's a pretty hard question. Yeah, there's the reason it's the reason why everyone freezes up when in an interview they're like, "Tell us about yourself."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I like to rock climb. I hang out with my friends.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you say? But in that situation where even for me, it was really fun to take a character, and it was kind of hard to make my character because it's just so many options and it was a bit confusing. So
Yeah.
if you're playing for the first time, it can be fun just to
Find somebody who knows
have
what they're
your
doing.
yeah, for sure, and have a DM that can just like maybe just give you a character.
Yeah. Or at
But
least guide you in the
yeah,
like, you should try these ones there.
yeah, yeah, for sure. But then you can take that character and think like, okay, I am. Let's well, okay, I'm a tiefling, which is like a half dragon, half human person, and I have purple skin and horns on my head and a tail, and I am a mage, and this is my backstory, and uh, this is what I want now. And there's so much you can do with that, you know? Like, there's a reason that we are so enthralled when authors and people can make really in-depth cool characters, because there's so much you can do, of course, and all the motivations and things. But when you have that framework of this is the person that I'm portraying, and this is where I came from, this is where I was going before we started this, or up until this moment, now we're all in the end together, whatever. you know and you could take that and kind of create your character at the same time be able to think as you're going like, oh, and but because of this, then I didn't have a good relationship with my parents growing up. They sent me to the mage school and I didn't want to go. Now I'm a good mage, but I don't like my parents. and, and all that stuff, and the things about like, in the book that we were using, at least, it talks about how tieflings are like, people think that they're demonic, and they're because they come, or not demonic, but they have like the dragon blood, and so people don't trust them. So sometimes you'll go into the store and the store owners will be like, yeah, I'll help everybody, but not that guy. So you can like, maybe they wouldn't give the kids that they're trying to work with a role like that, but there's just a lot that you can like. It's a less ambiguous way where you can take situations like that and just play through like what might happen and decide for yourself like, what's my motivation here? Like, I'm this person. I'm a neutral good, so I'd probably in this situation do this. So I think it helps you think through like just motivations in general.
Yeah.
you know
No, I've noticed that for me, like personally, I feel like, because in the games that I've played, I've noticed that I'm like way more open to being like, oh, I'll go talk to this character and ask them
hmm
this and that and interact this way, stuff
hmm
that I would never do in real
hmm
life.
yeah.
Stories I've heard, people take the robes, like the uniforms, and they
Uh-huh.
fake their way through. So I was like, what if two of us take these and we'll go ahead and whatever. So two of us put them on, and like down the line there was this trap where like these monsters came to life and attacked you if you, but they wouldn't do that if you had the cloaks on.
Like the robe is the
And there was
the
like
password.
multiple things through that dungeon
Mhm.
where it was like pretty obvious you were supposed to take the cloaks and put them on, but because the other half of the group didn't, like two of us almost died. And it was just like way more intense than it needed to be. And there's also like a point where there's this like bad wizard we were trying to track down who's their leader. There's a point where like my character, who's a wizard, came through the room, and he started like gathering up his things and running for this like secret passage. And so I like tried to use this freeze spell that makes him move really slow, but it missed. And like afterwards we were talking about that, we're like, wow, this story would have been completely different if like that's one spell had hit, and then like
Mhm.
he had moved slow, we could have captured him, we would have
Mhm.
gotten all this information, but he got away. And then we made all these mistakes.
Mhm.
And so it's fun because like creatively it helps you think through outcomes and then see different scenarios where you're like, whoa, this could play out differently if I do this, right? And it kind of,
Mhm.
I don't, it doesn't apply like a ton to real life situations because you're not raiding a dungeon and trying to kill people. But
Mhm.
it's fun just in that aspect of like getting out of your own head and seeing different scenarios and
Mhm.
creating like a story and a storyline with people.
Right. Yeah, and I saw it. Maybe talk about your point about Magic the Gathering first, because I was gonna
Oh yeah, so that
go somewhere
in
with that
this
next.
yeah. So part of this podcast, two things on this part. In this Dragon Talk podcast episode, they talked about how parents, it's so good for kids to be a part of something like this. because most parents, well, not most, but like a lot of the parents that go to the psychologist to get help with their kids, they're like, we just want our kid to not spend 75% of his life video games and electronics
By himself.
by himself in a electronic world. And especially kids with autism, they love video games and they understand them because it's a similar thing where there's
Right.
set parameters and
Visuals.
rules and frameworks that they can work within.
Mhm.
But a lot of these kids just play tons of video games. And he's saying, this is like a great opportunity to get them out of the house. But then he talked more about how games in general are good for like your family. He said there was one clinical psychologist who, when he was working with kids and teenagers, like he would teach them to play Magic the Gathering if they didn't know how, and then he would have decks in his office. And when those kids came to him, the first like session or couple sessions, they would just play Magic the Gathering and talk. And he said, I had a lot of kids who wouldn't open up to other psychologists, would eventually open up to me. And because like what we'd do is we'd get together and we'd play games, and I would just get to know them, and they would feel safe because we're playing a game that they like and enjoy. And he kind of talked about how these kids with Dungeons and Dragons or any game, they come with an invested interest in it already. They like fantasy, they like
Right.
games, they like imaginative things, right? So it can serve as a way to form connections with your kids, is to play games. And just it gives you something to do instead of just sit and try and talk. You can play a game, and then you can say, what kind of things are you into these days? Or you can see where the imagination takes the campaign. And a
Yeah.
lot of families are doing that more and more. They're like, no, we're gonna play Dungeons and Dragons with our kids because, like, it'll be fun to see what a 10-year-old imagines to do in a certain situation. Like, you just don't know
Yeah.
where that'll take you, and it bonds you as a group.
Hmm. That's cool. Yeah, that's not where I thought you were gonna go with that.
Yeah.
But that's cool because I feel like um, we've like us two have been pretty. Uh, we fought a lot when we were kids, on and off, physically, and then
The emotional fights were more with my sisters for me, but the physical ones were with Tyler.
that was us. Um, but we were friends a lot of the time, and especially then, as we've gotten older, obviously we've stayed pretty close. But I think a lot of the times, the times that we were really good friends, even when we were kids and fighting often, was when we were playing Magic together.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was something we both just understood. We both liked. Like we both. It was just something we could do together,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like, and it's by nature. It's kind of funny because we like to think of it as, you know, people waste playing card games and like uh, spending all their money on card games and not talking to other people and it's kind of similar stereotypes with Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yeah.
The old smelly guys not doing anything with their life. But for us, in a lot of ways, it was like how we connected with each other, and it helped us. Like it was something we could do that we didn't fight
Mm-hmm.
in, you know.
Yeah.
And it was just a good shared interest. And then I honestly think that it has shaped a lot of like the way we think
Mm-hmm.
since then. Like growing up playing it, and it's a fairly complicated game once you get into it. Once you start playing with some of the more complicated cards and stuff, uh, but it's all like logic. It's all like if I do this, he can respond with this. He has open mana, so what do I want to do? Should I attack? And it's all
Mm-hmm.
thinking through all these problems and thinking of solutions and thinking, okay, well, he's probably going to think I'm doing this, so I'm going to trap him into responding this way and blah, blah, you know?
Yeah.
You can think through all those situations and like think logically and through the process of what's going to happen if I do this. And so, and it was funny after we taught, I think it was after you got married, when we taught your now wife
Mm-hmm.
how to play. And uh, she didn't grab onto it quite like we did when we were little
She'll
kids.
play it when pressed.
But after she learned, she said You guys make so much more sense now.
Yeah.
She's like, now I see why you think the way you do. It's like,
Hmm.
it makes sense. And a lot of us, I think it's been like really good because we're pretty good at like logical like problem solving
Hmm.
and thinking through things those ways in that way.
Yeah, well, and just board games in general, like our whole
Yeah.
family. It was like every Sunday was board game day, basically, with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think back, like that's some of the like most time we spent bonding as a family was over games, you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think any type of like board game, card game, role playing game with
Mm-hmm.
as a family is just like a healthy, positive thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, it's true. And off of that, I definitely did see, talking about the stereotypes with these things, we definitely both knew plenty of guys at the game store that we would frequently. We plenty of guys who we saw, and even as kids, like I was pretty young when we were very active, um, probably 12 or younger.
Hmm.
Uh, I would still beat most of them, but but there was plenty of guys where even still I could tell I was like, I don't want to be like that guy.
Hmm.
And because there were definitely guys that were,
People get pretty into
yeah, and it was kind of their life, and some of them were married, and it seemed like they wouldn't s- see their spouse, like they'd be at the game store a lot, and
it.
their
Yeah,
spouse wasn't there, and it was
too far.
things like that. And some of them genuinely did have some bad hygiene. So the stereotypes aren't all
Really lovable
wrong.
guys.
Yeah, yeah, it was great. We had great times. But so you can obviously take it too far,
Hmm.
and it becomes your life, and you're there all the time, and then you're not working, and you're not progressing in other ways. But a lot of those ways, I think in our lives, it did help us to like, it helped me to like learn to socialize with like older people,
Hmm.
and lots of different kinds of people, because despite there being stereotypes about the specific person who plays these games, there was a pretty good variety of people there,
Yeah,
and learning to talk to all of them, and learning to play have a sportsman-like game,
yeah,
and seeing what it was like playing with the people who weren't sportsman-like,
yeah,
and would get really frustrated when they lose, or would make weird comments after they win or lose,
yeah.
and you're like, oh, okay, it's just this is a
Just a
game, but
game,
okay.
man.
Yeah.
You have kids.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of which, we got two comments on Instagram Live.
Okay.
Jess again said, she plays a female thug, and I love leaning into my inner bad A. Not a side of myself I often explore in real life.
Nice. That's awesome. That's half the fun is
Yeah.
doing something that's completely different from your
Hmm.
regular mentality and personality.
Right. Yeah. And being like, if I was like this, what would I do?
Yeah.
You
How would
know?
I treat the people?
Yeah.
Or how would I run into this battle?
Mm-hmm. Who would I steal from? Yeah. And then Eric, this is kind of what made me think of the last comment that I said before Jess's. He says, I personally love playing D&D, but what do you guys think about the possible negative consequences about playing D&D, and at what point do those negative consequences manifest?
Hmm. Well, when it turns into demon worship, that's when it gets scary.
when you really start getting into witchcraft.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
I think part of it is it's a big time commitment.
yeah.
So, like with all things, there's a balance. But I don't know. I think as long as you do it with a balance in the other things in your life, it's all right. And especially, I
Yeah.
think when you do it with friends and it's something that you're
Mhm.
like, this is what we do as a group,
Right.
I think it's generally a positive thing. But yeah, that'd be interesting. I, don't- I don't I don't
Yeah.
know. I guess we could ask the moms out there like whose kids have played D&D if they're just like this is the worst thing that ever happened to my son or I don't
Yeah.
know.
I mean, yeah, I think I pretty much agree. Like for me, playing with my group of friends, it was friends that I saw, I still see, um, decently often, but not that often. We've gotten older. We all have jobs. I'm in school. Some of them are in school. Whatever. We all have different things going on. It's hard to see each other all the time. So it was cool to have that time of the week where it was like, okay, it's I know that coming up on Wednesday, I've got this going on, and I'm gonna go hang out with my friends. It's just gonna
Hmm.
be a fun time. And there were times it'd be like, hey, sorry guys, I've got a ton of homework. This is finals, whatever. I'm not gonna be able to make it. And sometimes they'd play without me or whatever, and I just continue with them on the next one or whatever. But it was really cool to have that time to like, all right, I know I'm gonna hang out with them in this day, so it's like I have that. I could look forward to it. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
I got to see them more often than before we started playing,
Hmm. Yeah,
and
for sure. I feel like both groups, like I've seen those two groups of people more than I ever would have if we didn't like have that in common.
yeah, yeah,
So it's just a good because it's fun because it's ongoing. So you're like,
right.
okay, when's the next time we get together? Like it gives you something
hmm
to just constantly plan.
Yeah, yeah, and we had some like really good times. Like we, for the first little bit, Cameron and I maybe didn't take it seriously enough, but it was hard also because one of the guys was very serious, like I talked about earlier, and Cameron and I were just kind of trying to figure it out. So we are just kind of having a good time and like seeing what we can do and stuff, and trying to figure it all out. And but we also had a hard time not like making jokes and getting sidetracked. Uh, but it was still like it was super fun, and even when we were fully in character and diving into the story, like and not making like outside jokes outside of the game, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? Uh, it was super fun to dive in and like figure this stuff out with each other and like go through this story that my friend had created, which was really cool. He had this whole like world set up and all these. We found this magic ring that I used it mostly. I don't remember why. I think because I was just willing to use it, but it would like hurt me the more I used it, and it
Huh.
could kill me. And it was like a special type of damage that's really hard to heal.
Huh.
And so like one time I got myself down to like one hit point on accident, trying to like save us. Almost killed my character. Uh, but it was like it was a really good time. So I think yeah, when it's with friends, if it's with like a group of people that is not good, then it would be not good.
Yeah.
And if yeah, if you're spending way too much time ignoring other commitments,
Like with everything.
yeah,
Yep.
then, but other than that, it's just pretty fun.
It's fun times.
Yeah.
So we'll put our links to the articles we referenced in the show notes on a lot of bit of everything.com. The group that the doctor on Dragon Talk, I'm trying to remember his name, but it was like Basamazzo or something, is an Italian name. We'll put links to that on the website. But the group he works with is in Seattle, and it's called Aspiring Youth. And they actually do some other cool stuff too. They have a group. They have multiple groups that get together to play Dungeons and Dragons to help kids with autism and kids who are just really introverted and want to get better at making friends. But they also have a lot of things they do to try and support people who feel excluded or lonely. He talked about how they have shields made of ebony that you can give somebody, and it's kind of like a token of to remind them that they're never alone. Just for quirky, nerdy kids who are into that stuff, and just supporting those those outliers who maybe struggle to make friends or have a hard time. So we'll put links to that and the other stuff we talked about in the show notes. Thanks again for everybody who joined us live on YouTube and Instagram. And yeah, catch you on the
Yeah.
flip side.
Let us know